This is a Guide Your Light network production, creating podcasts with purpose.
All of the worst things about ourselves and our worst fears of ourselves is what the inner critic pipes up constantly. And for the vast majority of women, we're not even aware that we have this inner critic voice inside our heads. We just think that this is our normal, helpful, inner dialogue.
Welcome to the Things You Can't Unhear podcast. I'm your host, Maritza Barone. Get ready to hear moments that will help you to see the world differently and inspire you to become the happiest, healthiest, and kindest version of you. Today, we are diving into a conversation that will resonate with so many of us. How to understand and break free from our inner critic. Joining me is the incredible Megan Dalla-Camina, who is a globally recognized expert in women's leadership, empowerment, and well-being. As the founder and CEO of Women Rising, Megan has dedicated her work to helping women step into their power with authenticity and purpose. In this episode, we're unpacking 4 out of 13 archetypes of the inner critic, which she has outlined in her latest book. These 4 that I've chosen to outline in this conversation today are the perfectionist, the people pleaser, the good girl, and the chameleon. And I have to say, there were certainly elements in all of these that I recognized within myself. These voices are known to shape our decisions, hold us back from our full potential, and keep us stuck in patterns of self-doubt. But the good news is, once we recognize them, we can start to rewrite the script. Get ready for an empowering conversation that will give you the tools to quiet the inner critic and step fully into who you are meant to be. And don't forget to subscribe to the Things You Can't Unhear podcast and keep the conversation by commenting on Spotify. Welcome, Megan Dalla-Camina, to the Things You Can't Unhear podcast.
Hello, I'm so happy to be here with you.
Me too. Here we are again, 5 years down the track. And I just need to say that you were one of my first guests in the first 6 months of me launching this podcast back in 2019. And we had an amazing conversation. And I told you before we hit record, some of what you said actually still plays over in my head. And I reference you throughout my podcast all the time because your words really hit me back then. They were really what I needed to hear. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. That's amazing. That's amazing.
It's good to know you have that impact on people, isn't
Yes,
it?
exactly. I'm glad it was useful.
That is why you do what you do. And, we were saying earlier too, before we hit record, how much has changed since 2019. We have changed, the world has changed, our businesses have changed. Tell me how Megan has changed personally in the last 5 years and what's been happening since then.
Gosh, I was just saying before we hit record, I feel like not even another lifetime. I feel like it was another universe is how much has changed since 2019. I mean, 2019, Simple, Soulful, Sacred had just come out, my 3rd book. My business since then has completely changed. I founded Women Rising, my women's empowerment and leadership company, which just in 2020 completely blew up and exceeded any expectation I could have had for it with the Women Rising program. So that's been a wild ride, scaling that business, which we're still doing. My son is now 24, like a fully fledged man, adult. So that as a single parent, like that's completely changed my universe as well in terms of he still lives with me, but I'm essentially fully independent, which is a different world as well. Mothers will know what I'm talking about, parents. And I wrote my next book, Women Rising, which has just come out, started a PhD, like so much. Yeah, just so much has changed and so much personal growth. I've been on pilgrimage to India, I think 4 times since then. Yeah, just a lot of personal and professional growth and change.
Oh, wow. That is an absolutely epic 5 years. And I do remember you talking about your son who was 18 or 19 at the time, and you were having these amazing conversations with him. And yeah, now he's like you said, a full man that has grown
Man.
up. And obviously you've been busy working on your impact, trying to change the minds and hearts of women everywhere around the world. I picked up your new book, Women Rising, couple of weeks ago, and I've had it lying around on the coffee table. I have two young women who live here with me too, so they've been flicking around in it as well, and just leaving the breadcrumbs. And you talk about the breadcrumbs a lot, is leaving those breadcrumbs around for my daughters to pick it up, and my husband too, because I think it's important that we do have the conversation around women rising and what goes on in the hearts and minds of women.
Yes.
I today really want to talk about the inner critic, and I know you delve deeply into the inner critic in your book. It is something that, of course, for many of us, it's just unspoken. It's just this private little mean girl, mean person in our heads that stops us from doing things and moving forward in certain ways. What is the inner critic? How do you define it? What does that mean to you?
Oh, well, you just defined it really well. I mean, the inner critic is our inner narrative, but it's our negative inner narrative and story that really holds us back, limits us, tells us all the things that are wrong about ourselves. We're not smart enough, we're not good enough, we're not pretty enough, we're not thin enough. Everybody else is better than you. Everyone else is, going to be more successful than you. You should keep your thoughts to yourself. Like all of the worst things about ourselves and our worst fears of ourselves is what the inner critic pipes up constantly. And for the vast majority of women, we're not even aware that we have this inner critic voice inside our heads. We just think that this is our normal, helpful, inner dialogue. And, that's really the first part of everything that we have to do is start to realize, oh, there is this voice inside my head. It's not my friend. It's not helpful. And I can manage it and tame it so that it doesn't get in the way of all of my hopes and dreams.
And it does tend to get in the way. Let's just set an example for people. Perhaps you have just been offered an opportunity and you've been working your whole life for this opportunity to come in front of you, and you've agreed to it, you've said yes, but now that voice in your head is saying, maybe, well, I mean, you tell me what those voices in your head, maybe you're not good enough.
I mean, the inner critic would pipe up at many times along that spectrum. When you are if you're going to put yourself forward for an opportunity, whether you work for someone else, whether you work in your own business, maybe you're going for a new client, maybe there's a promotion that you want to go for, your inner critic in that stage, if you've got a loud inner critic, maybe you have the perfectionist inner critic, and we'll talk about the archetypes. You don't have enough qualifications, you haven't got enough experience. They'll laugh you out of the room. There's no way you should put yourself forward for that role. How stupid are you that you think that you could even get that opportunity? They're all examples of inner critic stories that might come up. And then once you've got the opportunity, maybe you relate to the imposter archetype and this whole story coming up around, what were you thinking? There's no way you can succeed in this role. They're going to laugh you out of the room. They're going to realize so quickly that they chose the wrong person. Your career is going to be in tethers. More of these stories that completely undermine who we are and what we know to be true about ourselves, and that can really unravel our self-belief, our confidence, and even worse than that, our very sense of who we are and what we know to be true.
Absolutely. In your book, you outline these archetypes, and I wanted to pull four out today for us to go through together, because these are four that really stood out for me as something that I'd love to delve deep into more for people to understand. And then when we understand things, we can take action with them. So the first one is the perfectionist. I'm sure a lot of people listening now, they put their hand up and they say, that's absolutely me. Being a perfectionist can be a good thing, but it also can stop you from taking the plunge to doing a lot of things. And I remember someone telling me once, perfectionism kills dreams. because you just don't do it because you're trying too hard to be perfect. Tell me about this one.
Yeah, so the archetypes, there's 13 archetypes of the inner critic, and I wrote them because I wanted to go deeper. I've been teaching about the inner critic for, gosh, 15 years. And it's really important that we understand the inner critic and, how it shows up for us as women. But then it's equally as important to get into the nitty-gritty of, well, what is your flavor of the inner critic? How does that show up for you? And that's why I created the 13 archetypes, so that we can really relate to and understand the light side and the shadow side of the archetype that we have. And most of us have multiple. So I'll just say that at the top. So the perfectionist was the first one I wrote, actually. And the perfectionist archetype is where nothing is ever good enough, where you are constantly just doing it again and again and again, pushing yourself to the brink, pushing yourself past the brink. And like it will never meet your standards, whether it's something you're doing in your business, something you're doing at work, something, your relationship. And perfectionist, maybe you're a perfectionist just in one area, like you're a perfectionist at work, but you're not at home. That's possible. But it is this constant striving for better, must always be better. And the light side of the perfectionist is that you have really high quality output, like you're really committed and dedicated, and that can be great, particularly in a career perspective. But the shadow side is that you will drive yourself to ruin if you don't get hold of those inner critic stories that are really pushing you to always have to perfect everything, and that nothing will ever be good enough.
I can see people nodding. I can actually feel people nodding with that. And learning to loosen that is definitely the key to freedom. What is some advice that you could give to the perfectionist listening right now?
Yeah, look, one of the questions I love for the perfectionist is, what would good enough look like? If it was good enough, if it was 80%, not 120%, what would that look like? So I think that's a really good question for the perfectionist, because most perfectionists would never frame their life or their work in those terms. They're always going for that 120, 150%. So that, what would 80% look like? And to really notice the stories that flare up when you ask that question, and the feelings that come up in your body when you ask that question. Like, where do you feel that? Do you feel that in your heart? Do you feel that in your gut? Is it that churning? And what are the stories that come out of that? While I'll fail is often the penultimate story for the perfectionist. Well, if it's not 150%, I will fail. They won't like me. Everyone will know I'm not good enough. What are your stories that are coming up? And in the book, and we can talk about it, I go through, some high level strategies that apply to all of the archetypes, that we can go. But the first step is really that recognition. Yeah. Like, when you think about what would 80% look like, what would good enough look like? That's a great question. Asking the question, what is driving me so hard? It's a bit of a harder question to ask the perfectionist, but in the book I guide through, all of the steps for each of the archetypes, and how to really manage that. But they're two questions that are really helpful for the perfectionist.
I think the
Um,
questions, you're
Settle
right,
down.
are the key to unlocking and loosening what's going on. And I just had a thought on that actually. It's for me as a perfectionist, and hopefully a lot of other people relate out there, is I think a lot sometimes when I'm trying to create something perfect, what the person or the ideal person that is going to be reading it will be thinking while I'm creating that. And then I
Mm.
try to flip it so that I just create without anyone reading it. So I say to myself, this is just for me. Create it,
Yes,
and this is going
yes,
anywhere.
yes. I love that. I love that. Without all that judgment and critique.
Exactly, exactly. All right, the next one that I want to talk about is the people pleaser. And this can happen to us from a young age, I think, as well. I see it in young girls. They just want to not ruffle feathers and sort of go under the radar a little bit. Tell me about this one and why so many of us sort of say no, because we don't want to be the first one, ruffling too many feathers.
Yeah, so the people pleaser is one of the most common ones for women. And like you hit on a really important point, is that we are conditioned from very young ages, as very young girls, to really fit inside gender norms and gender expectations. And that's what the whole first part of the book is about these paradoxes of power that really set women up to fail, and that we really need to understand how patriarchy and power plays out and limits us. And one of the main ways it does is it tells us as young girls that we should be accommodating and nurturing and look after everybody else and keep peace and harmony, and how that then perpetuates when we become grown women is this voice inside our heads, this inner critic that tells us, don't let people get upset with you. Like, your job is to keep the calm and to be agreeable. Girls were always taught in conscious and subconscious ways to be agreeable, to get along, and to not ruffle those feathers. So for us as women, that can really play through, as like in work settings, canvassing the room and figuring out, what does everybody think before I give my opinion, because I don't want to be the odd one out. I want to fit in. And part of doing that is people pleasing. Another major way people pleasing shows up is that we put everybody else's needs ahead of our own needs, whether it's our kids, our partner, our boss, our clients, our team, that everybody else gets attention. And then if we're lucky, we get the scraps at the bottom, because we're constantly trying to please and look after everybody else. And it's one of the people pleaser is one of the archetypes and one of the reasons why, for so many women, it's not even that we're at the bottom of our list. We're just not on the list at all, because we're just constantly having our attention go out there rather than, what is it that I think about this? What is it that I want here? If I was just pleasing myself, what would I say or do next? Like, that's a radical question for women to ask themselves. If I was the only one who had to be pleased here, how would I behave? How would I show up? That's the ultimate question for a people pleaser.
I laugh because I've just started asking myself that as I've gotten older. And I think my kids are older now too. I think it's really difficult when you have younger children to ask yourself what you want, because there's just such limited space,
Yes.
such limited.
Yes, that's true. And I was a single mother, so I completely understand that. And I also believe it is absolutely possible to find the spaces to satisfy and please yourself within the busyness. Because otherwise, what do? We literally put ourselves on hold until we think our kids are like 18 and out of school. But let me tell you, once we've fully cultivated the people pleasing and putting ourselves last, when our kids, like in all of those ages and stages of our kids, by the time they get to 18, we are so wired in that behavior that it is so hard to change. So I encourage anyone who's a parent who's listening to this, like, you got to do it at all ages and stages of your kids' lives, not just wait until we think, oh, when I get to that stage, then I'll have time for me. Like, find the moments, find the 5 minutes, the 10 minutes, the 30 minutes for the reflection, so that you are part of the equation, not on the sidelines.
And what do you say to people who are listening now that don't like not being liked? They're standing there and they're like, this is me. I don't say what I think because someone might get upset with that. But I know deep in my heart that if I say this, I truly believe it and it's right and it's so true for me. But what if I upset them? What if they don't like me anymore?
Yes. Well, I mean, I would sit with that question, what if they don't like me anymore? Like, what if?
Yeah. What
If
if?
that is what comes to pass, and then what? Right? Like, what would that mean in my life if I say this and this person disagrees with me? What happens? And play out all the scenarios. And then you get to sit with, well, in some situations, if you're in a work context, then absolutely, it may not be, you may not have career longevity if you always say everything that you think and please yourself before you please, your boss, as an example. So you may choose in those instances, well, I'm just going to keep that to myself, that I think that you suck, or whatever it is, right? But in other situations, like, what is the cost of silencing yourself? What is the cost of putting that person's needs and opinions before your own? Like, these are the questions that really get to the core of who am I and how do I want to be in the world? And therefore, how do I need to back myself and have power and agency over my life, over my thoughts, over my communication, so that I feel good about how I'm showing up? They're not small things, right? They're really not small things. But they're really important. Like, this is your life. This is your life. This is who you are in the world. And it's a choice to quieten yourself for other people's needs. And we can choose something different.
Absolutely powerful question. What if? What if I'm not friends with that person anymore? What if my work colleague doesn't respect me as much as they thought they did? What if my children are angry with me for half an hour? What if my husband needs to go for a walk otherwise, or before, when I express myself in a certain way? What if? Most people
Yeah.
get over it coming from a good place. And I think, yeah, it's a perfect question to ask. Thank you for that. The next one I want to talk about, and it might be a little bit of a crossover with the people pleaser, is the good girl. And we sort of touched on it, an element of that in the people pleaser as well. But it does have a standalone element to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, look, the good girl is, when I look at the good girl, I talk about, the true daughter of the patriarchy, because we are so conditioned. And it can be linked to the people pleaser, not always, but this good girl persona of, I always need to do the right thing. I always need to say the right thing. I need to comply. And for some women, that's, I need to comply with the cultural expectations of my family. For some, it is, I need to comply with the educational requirements, of my family. Translating into the workplace, I need to always be, exactly what my boss expects me to be. And like, no sense of rebellion, no sense of self authority when you're the good girl, because you're always trying to fit in and be exactly what people expect of you. So that's the good girl persona. And again, like, when we look at the paradoxes of power that I write about, so many expectations are placed on women. Be the good mother, be the good worker, be the ideal worker, lead in this certain way, and just always fit in to what either society or our family or our bosses, even our kids, the expectations that our kids have of us, and, how do I fit into that model? So the good girl is exceptionally prevalent in our society. And it is, again, like, these are pretty deep archetypes, and like, we've got to really drill in and be brave about looking at, like, where does the good girl show up? For some women, they don't relate to that archetype at all. Like, they're more the rebel, and
Mm.
and have really cultivated the rebel as an archetype. But for a lot of women, as soon as they see the good girl, they're like, oh, yeah, there's something in that for me that I need to look at.
Let's jump into the cultural side of it a little bit, because there are families out there that have certain expectations about what careers you need to take, how things need to be done, when families need to be created, when marriage needs to be done, what all of that.
Yes.
Obviously, people don't want to disconnect from their families all the time, and you don't want to have arguments within that as well. So I would love to get some advice and maybe some questions that you'd ask them to ask themselves, because your questions are very powerful, on
Yeah.
how to stand in their power a little bit more without breaking that cultural element as well.
Yes. Yeah, look, I mean, the Women Rising program that I run, we've had 10,000 women in the last 4 years go through that, and exceptional diversity within our community, and a lot of cultural diversity. So I see this up front, like up close and personal, every day as I'm coaching women in our program, and like this is a big one, this cultural aspect. And we have a lot of women in Asia, in India, in our programs, Middle East, all over the world. So if you the first question is like, do I relate to this? Like, is this good girl archetype? Like, how does this show up for me in my cultural makeup, if we're talking about culture? And to start to disentangle, what do other people want and expect for me? And what would I like and want and expect of myself? So that's really the first part, because if you are a good girl in a cultural context, then from a very young age, you will very likely have been told, this is what you're going to do. This is what's going to happen at this age. This is when you're going to get married. This is when you're going to have a baby. This is the education profession that you need to have. It's all been laid out for you your whole life. Yeah. This is how you will behave, and this is what a good girl looks like and does when you fit inside those cultural expectations. So there is often a piece of work that has to be done at the beginning. Number one, recognize, oh yeah, I fit into this good girl archetype. And number two, to start to ask the questions, what do I think? What do I want? Who even am I if I'm separate from my family and my cultural expectations? What does that look like for me? And that's the biggest piece of work, because it doesn't mean by any stretch that you need to separate yourself from your family, but there's an energetic and a mindset separation that needs to come so that you can figure out what is it that you want and who are you really. And then you can choose what actions you want to take. But until we get that clarity, it's just all enmeshed together. And it's very hard to determine, well, is this what I actually think and believe and want? Or is this just what my family, and the culture says that I should want for myself? So we've got to pull that apart first before we even think about the actions that we would take.
Yeah, you're right. And it's work. It might be painful work. It might be a journey too over time. I think this is a quite a deep one as well. It will be a process over time to really find yourself when you start to ask the questions on, hang on, who am I if I am not the person that I've been told to be this whole life so
Yes.
far?
And if I'm not the person that they think I am, right? And
Exactly.
this plays out beyond culture. So, that could fit into a cultural expectation. It could be in your relationship. Maybe you were one person when you came into a relationship, but you've evolved and grown so much. But you're really sitting in this good girl archetype that says, I need to be who he or she or they think that I am, even though I've been on this massive transformation journey in my life. But you're still fitting into that good girl model. Plays out at work, plays out in friendships, yeah, all over the place.
Yeah, amazing. Such great advice there, Megan. There's the last one that I want to talk about, and it's the chameleon. And I think this is a really good one to talk about because it's when we adapt to fit into different situations, I suppose. Talk to me about this one and why this is important for us to really break down and be able to comprehend so that we
Yeah.
can break through that if we need to.
Yeah, I love this archetype. I think it is so important for women to understand. For so many women, we morph and change ourselves based on who we think other people expect us to be. So if you're in a work, so say you work in a corporate environment that is very male dominated, and you will morph yourself, if you're the chameleon, to fit into those behaviors and those expectations of what the ideal worker, the ideal leader, how does everybody show up in this environment that is mostly men, very masculine. And okay, great, I need to morph and become this. That was my, a large part of my corporate career. And when or it could be you're in a friendship group, and when you are part of that group, maybe, everyone's a partier, and you're going to, you'd rather be at home, but you're going to turn into the chameleon to go and fit in with that social group because this is your tribe, these are your friends. You don't want to be outcast. And a big part of the underlying fear of the chameleon is that I'm going to be cast out. If I don't, and we think back to very primal requirements, that it literally, if you weren't part of the tribe, it would mean death for you, right? If you were cast out, you would die because you wouldn't be able to survive. And so much of that is in our DNA, like it's inbuilt for us. So that sense of, if I don't fit in, there will be dire consequences. So I'm going to change and morph myself in all situations to make sure that never happens. That's the chameleon.
That's incredible. Do you think most people adapt and change to certain situations that they're in? It could be, obviously you have to adapt if you're in a certain situation in a work setting. You're not going to be your party girl in your work setting, so you adapt. But it's where do we draw the line as to when we're holding ourselves back from
Yes,
being
and
this adaptable person?
that's a great question. So there's adaptability over here on the left, which is healthy adaptability. That, yeah, I'm gonna, I'm gonna, when we say, oh, bring your whole self to work, well, yeah, there's certain elements I'm gonna hold back. And there are ways that I will morph myself to be accepted and to be successful. And that's healthy adaptability. We all have that. When we're really the chameleon, it is where we lose ourselves in the process. And when we are just constantly, that constant morph and change, and our nervous system is on high alert because what's going to happen if I don't fit in this situation? And people who are listening who relate to that chameleon will know exactly, they'll like, I see you, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And and that can be linked really closely as well to the people pleaser. Like if you think about that, everyone needs to like me, everyone needs to be happy with me. The chameleon and the people pleaser can really, not all the time, but can, fit together quite nicely and compound each other. So yeah, I would be looking out for those, like, how do you feel at the end of the day? How do you feel when you've left a meeting or a room or a conversation or an evening out with your girlfriends, or spent time with your partner or someone new that you're seeing in a relationship sense? How do I feel when I walk away from that situation? Do I feel like I could be my true self, or do I feel like I had to step out of myself and change myself to belong in that situation? They're the questions for the chameleon, because for a lot of chameleon inner critic archetype, you will walk away with a sense of maybe energetic exhaustion. Like, I just had to put on such an act to fit in there, or you've had to lay down your armor because you had to armor up to feel like you could, belong in that situation. And if you start to tune in, you'll really start to feel that sense of, what is the cost here of always changing myself so that other people will accept me?
Such powerful words. You've obviously put a lot of time and effort into understanding these 13 different archetypes for us as women. And I think, the key to overcoming is that awareness piece, isn't it? You must have had a lot of fun creating these terms and these certain archetypes? How did you come up with all of the names? And is it something that you identified within yourself with all of these, or with the thousands of people that you've worked with?
Yeah, look, it was fun. It was also hard, to really look at. I mean, I'm a researcher, look at all of the research, look at all of the work I've done over the last 15, 20 years in, personal development, in mindset, I do a lot of work with Jungian analysis, and archetypal theory, and then really looking at the women. I've been coaching women for more than 15 years, and particularly the women rising community of 10,000 women in 4 years. Like, that's just a microcosm of all women everywhere, because we have all ages, all stages, all cultures, all different types of backgrounds and professions, and looking at how the inner critic shows up, and what are the inner critic stories, and what are all the different flavors. So that's really, there were more, like I could have had 25, but it needs to be manageable. So that's really how I really lasered them down to these 13 core archetypes that most women, the feedback that I'm getting from thousands of women who are reading the book is that maybe there's three that they really relate to. There could be more, but when they really narrow it down, 1 to 3 of those archetypes really hit the nail on the head for them around the inner critics.
And if we look at the inner critics as a whole picture,
Yeah.
what do you think are maybe a couple of key mindset shifts that we need to take as individuals to be able to begin to step in our power?
Yeah, so the thing that I recommend for everyone to do is this 3-step process that I've been teaching for a long time, and have literally thousands of women say it changed their life. It's deceptively simple. So should we share it with everybody?
Yes,
Okay, great.
please.
So the first step is with the inner critic work is to start to catch your stories, right? Number one, step one, catch the story. And this is what I outline in the book. And what that means is make the unconscious conscious, because we're all walking around, so many women are walking around with no idea that this inner critic voice inside their head is controlling every decision, every action they take, and how they feel about themselves, but we're unaware of it. So the first step is to start to really tune into what is my inner narrative. And when I first did that, this is like 15 years ago, I was absolutely shocked by how negative, how cruel and mean and undermining this voice was that was inside my mind, to where I am now, where really it's like my inner best friend in my head, not my inner critic. And when I hear my inner critic come up, I get to tame it very quickly by literally doing this 3-step process. So that first step, start to catch the stories. Um, and you can do this in a number of ways. A really good way to do it is think about, in the last 2 to 4 weeks, a situation that you've been in where you didn't take an action that you wanted to take. So maybe it was doing something new in your business, or it was putting yourself forward for something, or just speaking up in a meeting if you're in a workplace, or saying something to your partner and you held yourself back. And to tune into what was the story or the stories I was telling myself at that time. And it could be something like, they won't like me if I speak up, or they're going to think I'm stupid if I say that thing in the meeting, or I'm never going to succeed if I go after this new path in my business. Whatever it is, if you think about it situationally, it's a good way to really, okay, that's really interesting. That was the story that I was telling myself. And then once you pick up one of your stories, the second step is super simple. You ask yourself, is that true? That's it. Is that true? Is that story that if I said that, they're not going to like me? Is that true? Well, maybe, but maybe it was important that I had my voice heard in that meeting. So step 3, reframe into action. So next time I'm going to speak up in the meeting. Right. And I recommend everyone, I'm new tech, but I'm also old school, love post-it notes. So I always recommend for people who love a post-it note, just write, is that true, on a post-it note, and stick it where you sit, every day. Put it as an alert on your phone or in an app on your phone. Is that true? Because what that does is it interrupts the story. It interrupts that cognitive dissonance that we have around things that we're making up or things that we're extrapolating that aren't true, negative emotional and mental spirals that we go on, and it cuts it off at the pass to say, is that true? And then we can figure out what is true about this situation and what isn't true about this situation. So we can get to step 3, which is reframe into action. What is the action that you wanted to take? And how do you now use this as power to find your voice, as one example? So that's a 3-step process. Catch the story, ask, is that true? Reframe into action. That doesn't matter what your inner critic archetype is. That is the framework for really starting to work with and understand your inner critic and start to tame it.
I think we all need to post-it note all 3 of those tips. They're
Yes.
really thank you, Megan. Now, as you've said throughout this conversation, the book Women Rising has all of these tools in it, outlined in depth. So make sure you get your hands on it if this resonates with you as much as it does with me. Now, I do ask everyone this question based on the title of this podcast, Things You Can't Unhear. What was something that you once heard that you could not unhear and that created or sparked some positive change within you? And it may not have been a positive thing you heard. It may have been something that ruffled your feathers and you thought, right, I need to make a change as a result of this.
Yeah, what a great question. The thing that comes to mind for me is when I was still back in corporate, and I was really struggling with exhaustion and burnout. I was a single mum. My son was 6 years old, doing a lot of travel, big executive role. And I'd just come back from another trip to New York, and I'd driven into the car park in my office, and I was talking to my mum on the phone, and I was just so exhausted and felt so sick and so run down and so over it. And I said to my mum, I just don't think I can do this for one more minute, expecting that she would give me the pep talk of, oh no, you'll be fine, and you're just tired, and da 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 da, as she used to do. And instead she said to me, of course you can't, Megan, you have no life. And it was like such a moment of instant clarity that I got out of the car, got in the lift, got up into my boss's office, the CEO, and I said, I'm done. Like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I was literally working myself to death. And I was sick and completely burnt out. And that moment changed my life, because I then, gave up this coveted job that I'd worked my whole career for, transitioned into another role, started working part-time, and then everything else happened, from that, around wellness and coaching and yoga and writing books, and everything came from, from that moment. And could not unhear that you have no life. And is this how I want to be living? Is this how I want to be existing? And yeah, it changed everything for me. So yeah, that's what comes to mind.
That was a brilliant one. And I think, a lot of the time that things you can't unhear moment is something that we already knew within us deeply, and we hear it from
Yes.
some other person and it hits home like it did for you. Thank you so much
Yeah.
for sharing that. Amazing. Thank you again for your time here on the Things You Can't Unhear podcast. Maybe I'll see you in another 5 years and see what other empire and how many other thousands and thousands of women you have helped along the way. So thank you for everything that you do, Megan.
Thank you so much. It was beautiful talking to you.
Thanks for listening to the show. What did you think? And what did you feel? Let us know by leaving me a message on the Things You Can't Unhear Instagram community page. And if you can, give us some ratings love on your favourite listening platform.